I heard that bang.
Like a baby.
Well, good morning, everybody. I hope you had a nice night. We're obviously blessed with a lovely, beautiful day today, so hopefully we'll be able to have a little fun. So what are we doing sitting in this room? So the basic principle of all this stuff, to recapitulate the entire day of yesterday in one sentence, the basic principle is that things are more than you think they are. And so letting yourself be with your experience and in ways that are the way you think they are, but are more than that, will enable you to be more fully what you are and ultimately inhabit the full dimensionality that you actually consist of. We tend to obsess about and have our unconscious idea of what we are, what's going on, and so on and so forth. Our version of things, our version of what our scene is, what our life is, what we are, which is all very well and good. But because we obsess about that and put so much energy into that, we basically blind ourselves to noticing that there may be more than that. Not that that's necessarily untrue in any heavy-handed sense, but that there may be more that just doesn't fit within those categories, and that there may be beneficial and valuable and empowering to allow yourself to notice these things, and then you have access to participating in these other modes that you already have access to, that you already are, that this already is. That's what the spirituality stuff's all about, if anything. So, the good news is everything is already present right here, right now. You already have everything. You already are everything that you can ever be right now. Not in the sense of, you know, taking account of what you own or things like that, but in terms of all of the modes that you can function within, that you can engage with, you know, physical, mental, emotional, subtle energy, vibes, I mean, all kinds of stuff. You're already fully in that. You're already fully engaged in the full field of what you actually are. Now, typically, we acknowledge and think about and talk about a very small proportion of this because of, you know, it's all, as we talked about yesterday at great length, all the brainwashing we've all been subjected to about, you know, the sort of materialistic version of what you are and what's going on here. But if you sort of can just let all that go, you don't need to stop it or kill it or fight it. Just relax with that and let yourself feel the presence of your experience. You're sure to notice certain qualities or flavors that don't fit within your normal categories. Something's going on there. And then this is just the point, by feeling the full field of your experience, you will discover sort of flavors or frequencies or vibes or whatever that don't fit in your worldview, that don't fit within anything you can talk with anyone about, because we don't have categories for this kind of stuff. And yet it's immediately self-evident, it's immediately obvious if you look within your experiential field, and you will come to notice these other aspects, other subtleties or what have you. Maybe not so subtleties in some cases. Now, experiencing is a non-rational event. It's a non-rational actuality. It's a non-rational functionality. It makes no sense. You can't really say what you're doing. You can't really say how you're doing it, but here you are. So obviously it doesn't have to make sense. So as such, the best way to approach being with your experiential field, being with the full range of what is present, is by feeling it. And don't worry about what feeling it is. I don't mean feeling it like, now I'm feeling and now I'm not. I mean, just feeling the texture of experience. Pretend your experience is a textural presence and feel what that texture is. And again, you'll notice a range of textures. You'll notice a spectrum of all kinds of textures, coarse and subtle, and some sort of slow, and some very, very fast, and all kinds of different flavors and different modes of motion and different apparent degrees of structurality. And I mean, things you can't even categorize. But just by feeling the texture of this, and you'll notice that concurrently, there's all these different frequencies and different textures going on at the same time that don't have anything to do with each other. They don't get in the way of each other, but they don't make sense in terms of each other either. They're just here. They're just flavors of experience. There's some very obvious ones that we're all very familiar with. You're familiar with the sort of textural feeling of physical touch. You can feel your body, the presence of your body, your butt on the chair. If your hands are touching each other, you can feel the feeling of the skin, you can feel the temperature and all of that. We're all very familiar with this texture. And simultaneously, there's the presence of thought. Now, what texture does thought have? Thought is a very different texture than the texture of your, you can deliberately do something contrived like, just rub your hands together or feel your skin and just feel what that energy is like, what that texture is like. And at the same time, you'll be thinking. There'll be some degree of thought present, whether you're actively thinking or relatively quiescent. There's always energy present in the thought spectrum, let's call it, or the thought bandwidth, thought frequency. And you can feel what that texture is like. And they're very different textures, but they're actually not very different events. They're both a kind of a tingling, sparkling. If you feel what touch really is, it's kind of a tingling. Even like, so my butt's on the chair and it's kind of constant. And yet if I go to what it's really like in the moment, it's dynamic. It's sort of moving. It's almost like a note or a sound or something. It's sort of vibrating in a way. This becomes very obvious, with more sort of, you poke yourself or pinch yourself, and it's like a little flare of light or something, which is sort of a little high vibration. You can sort of feel the texture of the energy that constitutes that sort of bandwidth of experiential energy, let's call it, whatever. Right, and then at the same time, there's thought present. What's the texture of that bandwidth? It's interesting, isn't it? It's very much more subtle, more sort of delicate. It's almost like Northern Lights or something. Who knows what it is? You can look for yourself. But it has an actuality. It actually has a quality. When you're thinking, you're thinking because something is present. Just like when you're seeing, you're seeing because light is present and you can recognize the texture of light. So thought is actually an object, let's say, or it's an objective quality within experience. It's a certain flavor of texture. And when you feel that present, you're thinking. And you intuitively recognize it because you're familiar with that sort of texture. You can tell the difference between a thought and something you're seeing because light has a very different texture experientially than thought does. And you can tell the difference between seeing and feeling because seeing light has a very different texture than feeling sensation of touch. The same with, of course, with hearing, right? I mean, all the normal categories of sense experience, the five senses and mind. And then there's other, bandwidths of sensation. There's sort of these very subtle vibes or something. It's not exactly thought, it's something else. It's just very, very subtle, very delicate, very sort of high frequency. It's present, and it's a very strange kind of a ghostly presence because it's not very heavy-handed and it doesn't form sort of big shapes like we get in our field of vision. But it's sort of this, ghostly little flavors and wisps and buzzes and who knows what. You can't really talk about it. But if you look, of course, you'll find it's very familiar that there is actually experiential event outside of the five senses and thought. There's more there. Like if you just look at, in fact, let's do it. Would you like to do a little experiment? Let's do a little experiment. So here's your field of vision floating. Just sort of let's take an inventory of your experiential field. So here's the bubble of your experience, right? Everything you're experiencing is within this bubble. There's nothing else that exists, right? This is just empirical obviousness. So here's your field of vision floating here, right? This sort of sideways, rough ovoid. And you're very familiar, it's got all this light and colors and shapes appearing in light. And you go to the edges of the field of vision, and it gets kind of grayish and a little fuzzy and a little sort of, I don't know what, little loses definition. But it doesn't really have a sharp edge, does it? But at some point it stops. At some point you can go beyond it, and it's not a field of vision anymore. So the field of vision is kind of bounded in terms of this is sort of the area it takes up in your experience, right? And then, so this field of vision is always here. It's just sitting here, right? This big sort of sideways oval, this bag sitting front and center, right? Now, you're hearing at the same time. Where's the hearing happening? It doesn't get in the way of the field of vision, does it? It's like it happens in its own sort of space. And you can't, it's not a simple spatiality where the field of vision is here and you go back 3 inches and there's where you're here. It's not like that. It's not a simple structurality. But right now you're hearing, right? And you're seeing. And they aren't getting in each other's way. They happen like in their own bandwidth. And they have notice the texture of light. Light has a very fine, very sort of a high frequency, almost crystalline vibration or texture to it, right? Just don't worry about qualifying it or classifying it. Just feel it. Feel what the dynamism of light. And at the same time, look at the texture of sound. Sound has a very different texture, doesn't it? It's a little thicker. It's a little slower, maybe. A little more opaque or something. Maybe not opaque, that might not be a good word. But just compare the texture of sound, the actuality of your experience, the texture of sound, feel what that feels like, and then feel what light feels like. And look at how you can instantly, intuitively tell the difference between light and sound, because it has a different texture. So, and they don't get in the way of each other, they coexist in their own bandwidth or something, their own dimension, who knows what. And then look at your touch. You feel your body, you feel the temperature of the air, you feel your butt on the chair, you feel your feet on the floor, whatever actual field of sensation you're feeling. It's kind of a roughly body-shaped or some weird sort of shaped field of sort of tingles. Feel the texture of what touch feels like. And then compare the texture of touch to the texture of sound. The texture of touch to the texture of sound. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? They're both sort of the same thing, but they're different too. They have a different texture. They have a different sort of a flavor to them, don't they? And they don't get in each other's way, do they? The field of touch is sort of a little bubble of its own, of these tingles, this sort of body-shaped tingles that are just sort of, tingling there, right? And then sound is happening at the same time, and they sort of coexist. It's like they're missing each other. They don't actually get in each other's way. They're kind of missing each other, but they coexist. And thought's happening too, isn't it? So that fine, delicate texture of thought is present. Texture of light is present. Different sort of bandwidth, different texture. Texture of touch is present. And smell and taste are very obvious. In my case, they're not very strong because I was a smoker when I was a kid, and I had throat cancer, which completely bollocksed up my sense of taste. So anyway, we can skip over those. If you have a good sense of smell and taste, you can spend some time being with those textures. But again, you'll discover the same thing. These textural flavors exist kind of in their own. They don't get in each other's way. They coexist in their own little space, their own little dimension or whatever. And they're all textural variations on basically the same thing, basically a kind of a real-time tingling, a real-time sparkling. I mean, again, we can't put language on what this is, but this texture is felt. The texture of light is felt. The texture of sound is felt. The texture of thought is felt. And this is how we know the difference between them. Now, find another texture. Find something that's not in any of those groupings of thought or the five senses. Maybe something really, really fine, really delicate. Maybe it's...
Is impression different than a thought?
No. We're talking about feeling a texture. Find a texture. Try and look. What does it feel like 8 feet above your head? What's it feel like? Just pretend you can feel what it feels like 8 feet above your head. Feel what it feels like. Just feel, what's it like there? What texture does it have? And whatever you feel there, your field of vision is still present. Even if your eyes are closed, your field of vision is full. It's just full of all these delicate sort of gray sparkles or patterns or whatever, right? But it's never not full. Even if you're in a quiet room, your field of hearing is full. It's just full of different volume, different frequencies, but it's always full. Every sense field is always a fullness. There's never more or less present. Notice that. If you close your eyes, the field of vision is still sitting there. It's still full. It's just full of these very delicate sort of little flickers and little big patterns and cloudy shapes and whatever. And then you open your eyes and all of a sudden it's all these colors and shapes, but it's not any fuller. It's not that there's more present. It's just a different sort of a texture, a different sort of an amplitude or whatever. And so you can play with this. Just feel all of the sense fields at once, and your attention will naturally drift and sort of emphasize one or another. Don't worry about that. But feel the coexistence of the full field of experience, and especially feel the way there's other experience, other qualities that are not categorized within the five senses or within mind in any simple sense, and explore these textures. And notice how that is also present within the field of experience. And it's real, it's you, it's actually here. And you can let yourself feel the way this is and feel how it's all present, it's all you, and there's nothing else. There's this bubble of different experiential textures floating into your experience. Try and find anything else. This is it. This is reality. This is the universe, right? And look and see if you can find anything else. And if you do find anything else, where is it? It'll be within your field of experience, or you wouldn't be experiencing it, of course. So, and all this by just feeling. Just feel the textures, And obviously, you're not feeling it like with your hands. You're sort of just delicately feeling it with your consciousness, with your intelligence, feeling the dynamism of it. Another interesting thing is all of these qualities that appear within all the sense fields. It's very dynamic, aren't they? They're like constantly shimmering. They're like a tuning fork. It's like an energy that is sparkling continually, right? It's not static. It's not just something. It's not like something that's sitting there inertly. If you look closely, you'll find you can't find anything inert anywhere within experience. It's all vibrating. It's all shimmering or whatever, humming. And so you can play with this. Just feel the presence of your experiential field as a field of textures. With all the different senses. Notice the way they all, as we've been talking about, they all exist concurrently. They don't get in each other's way. They're all different textures. And as you become more sophisticated at playing with this, you'll notice there's literally an infinite range of textures, most of which are completely beyond the range of what we categorize as the five senses in the mind, and so on and so forth. All sorts of very subtle energies, which we're always experiencing, but we don't talk about because we don't have words to talk about it. How do you talk about subtle vibes? I mean, you see this word subtle vibes, that like, what? You know, it just sounds like utter bullshit. Subtle vibe. And yet, experientially, these things are obvious and they're actual. And you don't need to talk about them, because it's not about talking about them, it's not about describing them or getting a handle on them. It's about feeling their actuality, and by feeling experiential energy, it shows you what it is. That is the most powerful, the most important principle of all this stuff. You don't need to figure it out. You don't need to write a dissertation on it. You just feel the presence in the nature. You know, you feel it intelligently, feel it engagedly, feel it relaxedly, playfully. Feel the presence of experiential energy, and it will show you what it is. Profoundly, because it's not inert. It's not just stuff that's vibrating or something. It's intelligence. It's made of pure intelligence. It's made of pure profundity in completely irrational, nonverbal ways. So it's not like there's any words involved or any description involved, but there's enormous content of intelligence, enormous content of meaningfulness. And just by feeling these textures, you learn a lot. You know, you won't be able to say what you learn necessarily, but you'll know it, you'll be inhabiting it, you'll be owning it. And you know, it's all very slippery and paradoxical, because of course you're already actually inhabiting it and you always have been. But because we get locked into a simplified version of what we are and what we're doing, we sort of ignore 90% of it because it's irrelevant, because it's just noise in the system or something. You know, yeah, there's this weird buzzing over my head. It's like, yeah, who cares? You know, I'm busy doing this, whatever. But on the contrary, if you take some time out and just let yourself feel the field of experience, you discover all this stuff's here. It's all real. It's all you, and it all is profound. It all can communicate what it is, and can show you what you are, show you what this reality is, which turns out to be very empowering, very integrating, and very cool. A lot of fun. It's really interesting to discover what's going on here. I mean, it's a whole lot cooler than the normal human version of things. And anything else we could talk about, and everything we have talked about, is just variations and aspects of this, of that, of just what we were touching on. You discover what you are by feeling it. That's simple. And feeling is intensely intelligent engagement. It's not a rational intelligence, it's not an analytical intelligence, but it's profound intelligence. It's the inherent intelligence. It's the intelligence which is actually doing your metabolism, which is presenting all this incredible barrage of information in real time with absolute precision in all your sense fields. I mean, the engagement of intelligence with experiential qualities is inconceivably powerful, inconceivably broad, and you're doing it all the time, nonstop. You know, you've got some serious chops, and yet we don't let ourselves own that intelligence because we don't identify with it. No, my intelligence is what I can think about and what I can talk about, you know, as opposed to just this field of hyper-competent presence, you know, that just is keeping all the photons here, doing the laws of physics, running gravity, keeping the stars in their orbits. You are that. You are what's doing all that, right here, right now, within your experiential field. And simply by this, you know, this sort of process or game of feeling, letting yourself feel what it is, letting it show you what it is non-verbally, you will come to realize that. You come to know that and see it very clearly. And you come to inhabit it. You come to identify with it rather than just with a very small part of it that we're used to identifying with. That was pretty good. I kind of botched the introduction yesterday, sorry. I never have a fixed, you know, platform or speech I'm going to give, because I like to speak spontaneously, because that keeps it real, it keeps me from becoming a total bullshit artist. And so, so today I was a little more on. Yes.
Is feeling it any different than playing with it?
No.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah, it's by calling it feeling, it kind of bypasses, since feeling is it by its very nature so non-logical and non-rational. Feeling is something we do without knowing how we do it. And so just by positing it as that, it's kind of priming the pump to irrational engagement without process. So when I say feeling, it just leaves the door open to just direct presence engagement without worrying about how you're doing it or what you're doing or anything like that. So it's all about, it's a trick. I mean, calling it feeling in a way is a trick, but it's actually accurate too, because what feeling is already, this word feeling we have refers to an irrational, intelligent engagement that we don't know how we're doing it. So right away we've gotten out of process. Right away we've gotten out of logic and narratability and interpretability, which is kind of the point, because this is not a rational event. This is not a logical event. This is a real event.
So in other words, we could also use perhaps as tuning into it. As a musician, I'm fascinated with these
Absolutely.
things. I learn instruments just by putting it in front of me, and it starts to, try this, try this.
Exactly.
That, I believe, is tuning in.
And precisely.
Playing it, and I like the concept that we play it, and it plays us.
Precisely. It is exactly. And the experience will show, like an instrument shows you how to play it, experience will show you how to feel it. You just be with it, you dance with it, you play with it, you be let yourself be playful with it, let yourself be loose, don't be too worried about process. And just by feeling it, by engaging with it, it will show you new tricks of how to engage with it. So the whole thing can kind of like spiral up and mushroom up on itself. Irrationally, you won't even be able to talk about it or even think about it. But that's irrelevant, because it's not about that, it's about enjoying it, it's about doing it and tripping on it. Because this is about experiential engagement. It's not about, analyzing or describing or making sense. And again, it's not the opposite. It's not like, I need to stop thinking or I need to stop analyzing, because that's cool too, because that's more mode of energy presence in actuality. Analysis pretends to be analytical thought, but it isn't. That's its big conceit. It's a big con job. Analytical thought pretends to be I'm thinking about something. Bullshit. It's a weird, spontaneous, irrational energy dance that's occurring in your mental bandwidth. And the fact that it also can be analytical in the process is very cool and very weird. So again, it's not about steering anything or controlling anything. It's just about letting yourself feel what's present, whatever it is, and then just follow it, trip on it, play with it, let it go wherever it goes, and don't have any preconceptions, or don't worry about preconceptions in terms of what it's going to be like or what its limitations are or anything. Yeah.
So in experimenting with saying, what can I feel beyond my sensory fields? I come up with something, but I have no way of telling if it's imaginary. Am I just
Don't worry about it.
something?
Don't qualify it. Don't worry about imagining. Nothing wrong with imagining. Imagining is a very cool thing to explore. I mean, you can play with this deliberately. You can think a conscious thought and then imagine something, and look at what the difference is. Look at what the texture of that is. Picture yourself walking into a grove of trees. Just bang, just do it. And then at the same time, think about, describing the artwork behind me. And all of a sudden, there's these two different textures there. Because the imagination texture, experiential texture, is just a different kind of thing. know. But again, it's not about sorting it out or parsing it. It's just about feeling it, and don't worry about, the fact that it is different will be made inherently obvious by the texture itself. So you don't need to sort it out. Most of what might be called subtle experience is written off as either imagination or noise in the system. So that's just a rationalist's way of poo-pooing anything that's outside of their system. Nothing's imaginary, everything is actual. Actual experience. When you begin qualifying as this or that, then that becomes subject to, criticism or whatever.
This is really interesting in that I find myself willing to cut slack to people who have an experience and start to insist on it and say, this is God, this is presence, this is being, this is consciousness.
Hey, I'm one of those flakes.
Well,
this is God.
It's the insistence on a particular experience to the exclusion of others. Say, well, you've got to get this. And I have no way of knowing what this is for that person. Because it's, that's great. Thank you. I would really like.
So it's also, if I'm hearing correctly, fake it till you make it, even though there's no faking it.
Absolutely.
So Schweiger and Profondo, and that's where it's at.
Absolutely. And we touched on this briefly, that, one of the major, possibly the major ways that, to speak very sloppily, consciousness orients itself within the experiential field is by means of what might be called hypnosis or autosuggestion, which is exactly fake it till you make it. So consciousness kind of assumes that something is a certain way, and just by that assumption, it suddenly becomes that to an extent. All human language is basically hypnotic. As soon as someone says something, your consciousness spontaneously goes to some simulation of what you think they're talking about, automatically, which is hypnosis. It's like saying, picture a green elephant. All of a sudden, some degree of a green elephant is going to appear in your imagination, right? That's hypnosis. We're very familiar with hypnosis because we're all doing it all the time, just with language, and we do it to ourselves with our trains of thought and so on. So this being an organizational mode of the way consciousness sort of, or let's say, navigates within itself, you can take advantage of that and use it deliberately for, like, make yourself do the impossible. Say, I'm going to feel what it feels like above my head, and then you just do it. You don't worry about whether you're actually doing it or what it is. You just do it, and something will happen. And that something will be real experience. Whether it's 8 feet above your head or not, who gives a shit? That's not what it's about. It's about using these tricks to get access to experiential modes that are relatively fresh, that you're not used to hanging out in, that are less familiar. And that way you sort of stretch your own boundaries of what your what home is, what your native modes are, what your universe looks like. Yes, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, I'm sorry. So a friend of mine has hallucinations about God speaking to him, and he's bipolar as well. So is that actually helping him? I mean, like I've told him about Brahma asking people who have visions to discount it. But in the light of what you were saying about hypnosis, I was thinking maybe there's something to that hallucination which is manifesting as a reality to him.
Well, there's something to the hallucination, but it's not what he thinks it is. I mean, and the same thing applies to all of our experience. The same thing applies to those of us that aren't afflicted in an obvious way like that with, with psychological conditions, with severe psychological conditions. All of experience is actual, but none of it is what we think it is. So the problem isn't experience, the problem is our interpretation of experience.
Mhm.
So if I hear God talk to me, I'm experiencing something, but jumping to the conclusion that it's God talks to me, unless I'm very, very sophisticated and subtle, is a mistake. On the other hand, in actuality, anything whatsoever that you experience is God talking to you. So in a subtle way, your friend, even with his craziness, is right on the money. The problem isn't that he thinks that's God talking to him. The problem is that he thinks anything else isn't. No, everything that you experience is a miraculous energy presence, and miraculous pretty much to me means from God. Whatever. Leave aside the philosophy of what a God would be or whatever, but miraculous is this is just here. All this is just here. Just poof, here it is, right? How weird is that? And it's all equally present. It's all equally miraculous. So, thinking of it as a transmission from the divine is fine. But then it starts getting really fun when you begin to look at what's perceiving it, what's seeing all this that's present. And again, you can't find anything. And so that's miraculous too. That this is being seen as miraculous. So this is a transmission from the divine to the divine. The divine is seeing your experience, and the divine is creating your experience, and it's talking to itself as all of this. And obviously that's an absurd description, but it's not untrue. When you really, but just by feeling what is present in the way that is present, it becomes quite obvious that this is a very, very strange actuality. It's a very, very strange event here. And what it is, the way that it is this, the way it is perceived, what's perceiving it, what is appearing, all of these are inconceivably weird and inconceivably astounding. And obviously so, if you look sensitively at any aspect of it. Look at what's seeing your experience right now. Usually we just think, well, I'm seeing my experience. Well, sure. Okay, but what do you mean by I? What is actually seeing your experience? What's perceiving the light that's appearing in your experience right now? This is not an abstraction. It's really happening, right? What's perceiving it?
That's where it falls apart, right?
Well, it doesn't fall apart. That's the point. It doesn't fall apart. And yet, there's nothing there. You can't find anything. But it's not nothing, because it's happening. Calling it miraculous is as good as calling it anything. You look for what is seeing experience, you can't find it. You look for what's appearing, you can't find it. Well, here's the light. I can see the light. It's very obvious. It's just right here. What do you mean you can't find it? Okay, look very closely at what light is. Here it is. It's real. Don't look in the abstract. Look at the light that is actually appearing to you. Try and see what it is. Try and see where it's coming from. Or if you get too confused about light bulbs and suns and things, close your eyes. When you close your eyes, you feel the vision is still full of light. When you go to sleep, you feel the vision is still full of light. You start dreaming, you feel the vision is still full of light. Where's that light coming from? There's no light bulbs when you're asleep. There's no light bulbs when you're dreaming. There's no sun. It might look like there is. But where's all this light coming from? And what is it that's coming? What is it that's appearing? These questions have no simple answer, but there's no limit to how sensitively you can be with these phenomena, these actualities. Not conceptually, but just feel it. But it's actually right here. You can feel it. And you can learn a lot just by feeling. And what you learn will be staggering.
So about sleep and seeing the light. So Ramana kind of say stuff like you have the memory of having slept well, and so you know that you existed in your sleep without your mind.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of I almost feel like the lights go out,
Right.
then I wake up, and I kind of think that I'm extrapolating my feeling of having rested to a memory of having been happy.
Right.
So how do I actually sense that I exist
Yes.
without the mind?
Right. Well, this requires training. If you're used to identifying with your mind in the waking state, your conscious mind, you may be insensitive to other modes of intelligence. But they exist, they're there. And a very good way for training what exactly you're talking about is when you're going to sleep. When you're going to sleep at night, you'll notice an interesting thing happens. There's a sort of a receding from the conscious state, receding. The world sort of, close your eyes and the world disappears, and there's all these textures. And for a while, you're still awake and you're still being with, modes of hearing and picturing things and so on. But there's a gradual transition as all of that recedes, and a different mode begins to appear. The mode is very amorphous. It's sort of more vague. It's more like underwater. I mean, you can't say precisely what it is, of course, because we're talking in the waking state, and you can't capture the sleep state in the waking state. But because there is this transition where you're not really in one state or the other, it's possible to be sensitive to explore it. And again, you can't do it by trying to take the waking state with you to the sleep state. You'll never go to sleep. So you do it by feeling the texture. So as you're falling asleep, you can do this, again, you can do this kind of hypnotically. As you're falling asleep, just say, I'm feeling this transition, I'm feeling it. And eventually that will become nonverbal and you'll actually be feeling it. And at a certain point it'll fall off and you'll be asleep. But that point can get farther and farther as if you practice. Explore it.
Well, is that any different from lucid dreaming?
Maybe, maybe not. Lucid dreaming is a little bit different because lucid dreaming is the sort of awakening of a degree of analytical consciousness within a dream state. Whereas when you go into deep sleep, typically it's not. There's no lucidity there at all. It's very amorphous. It's very undefined. But it's not without intelligence, and it's not without you. You're actually there, but the you that's there is a different mode than the you that is in the waking state. And of course, we're all very familiar with ourselves in the waking state, and we're used to identifying with this is the real state. This is the real me. Then I go to sleep, and the real me sort of shuts down, and then it comes back. But the sleep state thinks exactly the opposite. The sleep you, the deep sleep persona that you are, and it exists, when the waking state disappears, it thinks it's waking up. I mean, in its terms. It doesn't qualify it as that, of course. God knows what it's like. Because talking about the waking state can't be done, because it's... But it's not nothing. And you already are it, because you do this every day, or more and more, if you're lucky, right? So you're very familiar with this. And it is possible to become aware of this. Not aware as your waking persona, but aware as what you really are, most of which is irrational, non-waking consciousness. Okay, here's an interesting trick. Here's an interesting aspect. Right now, you are awake. Right now, you're also asleep. Right now, you're also dreaming. Always. You're always in all three states. And the state that seems to be actually occurring, that you may define as occurring, it just becomes a dominance, a degree of dominance. So when you're in the waking state is dominant, then you're awake and you can talk and you can notice things and you can remember things. But maybe you have a little bit of a daydream. Maybe you get distracted. Maybe you go into a memory. That's a little bit of an intrusion of a dream condition. Or maybe you just kind of space out. That might be a little bit of an intrusion of the deep sleep condition. So all of these modes are actually present, so you can explore them from within the waking state. But again, it requires a kind of a development of sensitivity and subtlety, or else you're just fantasizing about it, and then you're fantasizing about being asleep, which is not necessarily exactly the same thing. well, not necessarily entirely irrelevant, so you can play with them. But a good way to play with this is really when you're going to sleep, just every time you go to sleep at night, just check it out. Tune into it as an actual transition and just let yourself try and feel what that's like. And you will be able to gain some kind of a more immediate sense of it by exploring it, by familiarity. And ultimately, you'll be awake all the time. Even when you're in deep sleep, you'll be awake, but not awake like a lucid dream, like you're watching it, but you'll know you're there because you won't be identifying just with your waking self, you'll be identifying with your deep sleep self and identifying with your dream self. So you kind of switch gears, but it's always you, as opposed to the more normal psychology where we identify with our waking state and then we're gone. And then we come back. So there's intervals where we're gone. But that's, again, it's kind of, our psychology is so complex. But it's actually possible to become aware of, to learn to inhabit and identify with your sleeping state, your sleeping mode, because it is you. It's not like you cease. It is actually you, but it's a different you, a different, well, just a whole, that's a good way to put it. It's a you with very different functions and a very different kind of qualities of competence. You have competence and you have function in your deep sleep state, but it's a very different competence and function than you have in your waking state. Because in the waking state, analysis, you might say analysis and rational mind and differentiation is dominant. In the deep sleep state, it's much more a kind of a subterranean, like feeling deep ocean currents or something. I mean, this is just like poetry. But anyway, it is what it is, and it is possible to sort of become more, to have more access to that, because you are actually there. It's not nothing.
Is there a consciousness there?
It's all consciousness. There's nothing but consciousness. There is nothing. There is no non-consciousness. Consciousness is what everything is made of.
What I'm confused about is there's no I there, perhaps.
Yes, there is. It's just not a waking eye. Waking state eye is just a special kind of eye.
The sleep state has an eye?
Of course. Or more accurately, in your case, it has a you. But it's not the you that you're thinking of as you in the waking state. But the you that you think of in the waking state isn't the you really are. And this is the point of this whole exercise we did in the beginning, where you feel the field of your experience, because you will notice very quickly that most of these textures have absolutely nothing to do with your conscious you, with you sitting there in your life in the chair and being at the spiritual talk. Because experience is textural, and all, I would say most, but really all of this texturality is irrational, what we qualify as unconscious. The conscious mind is like a thin oil slick on the surface of a vast ocean.
Yeah.
And you're the whole ocean. You're not just the oil slick, even if we're used to identifying with that. I mean, identification is really, in a way, identification is the whole issue. Identification is how we pretend to ourselves to be limited. You are the totality of your reality, but you only let yourself identify with a tiny, tiny portion of that. So you qualify as your body and your history and your interactions or what have you.
So would you say the whole of the ocean is available right now, or
Yes.
your experience just
It's always here.
ignored, dismissed?
Yes. It's been ignored and dismissed because we write it off as meaningless. It's just these textures and these flavors and these vibes but it's not part of human discourse. It's not part of anything we can talk about or think about or certainly sell, make money on. So what good is it?
So would you say subconsciousness and the the unconscious is
Yes.
not.
Subconscious and unconscious are not really sub and un. They're just censored by the conscious mind. Tyranny is an illusion.
Hmm.
It's a self-enforced illusion. And basically all of this is about is breaking that veneer of identification with the conscious mind. Because all of the unconscious modes are actually present and available, and you actually already are them, and you're already doing them. And so it's all just about letting yourself notice that. So it's, you know, it's very slippery. You already are, and you already are doing what you're trying to notice, that what you're trying to become and what you're trying to do. You already are that. So it's all like a trick of the light. It's all just let yourself notice what is already happening. And we don't notice it because we devalue it. The conscious mind devalues it. You know, you walk into a situation and the conscious mind goes, "What's going on here? Why am I here? Where's the action?" You know, the unconscious mind goes, the unconscious mind is hugging everything, every little shade of light and color and smell and vibe. It's all over that, like, you know. I could get into comedy here, but anyway, let's just say it's all over that. But the conscious mind is like, so who's here is interesting? I'm nobody. I'm the unconscious mind. The unconscious mind is just drinking it in. It's just loving every single flavor. And you are that. You're doing that. But when we have let ourselves get, you know, seduced into conscious mind identification, which is the normal human mode these days, we don't let ourselves notice that and appreciate it. So there's all of this stuff going on that we devalue, we write it off. Like, I'm seeing all these colors. Who cares? I don't care about colors. You know, where's the action? Why am I here? I came here to listen to this guy talking. He's spouting all this weird bullshit, and I'm leaving. But the unconscious mind doesn't analyze like that. It just bang, full field engagement. And so in a way, the kind of exercise we were doing this morning is a way of letting yourself feel that full field engagement, which you're already doing. So it's not even doing something you don't know how to do. It's just letting yourself notice that. And when you let yourself notice it, it'll all of a sudden become very easy because, of course, you are already very expert at it. You're always doing it 24/7.
It's like a reorientation to experiencing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what content or what spectrum of experiencing you're focused on. Once you're oriented to the experiencing,
Yeah.
conscious, unconscious, it's
Exactly.
maybe more subtle on the spectrum of experiencing, but it's still experiencing because that is present.
Exactly.
So he's reminding me of the notion of reference points and no reference point. Can you jump off on that without you?
Well, reference points are arbitrary, and consciousness erects arbitrary reference points all the time.
And what?
Consciousness erects, settles on, you know, virtually creates arbitrary reference points all the time. But reference points are always within the full field and don't ever block or damage the presence of the full field.
Can you give an example
No.
of a reference point?
An example of a reference point would be giving an example of a reference point. Me sitting here like this. What's the reference point? You'd have to say what the reference point is, and all of a sudden there's a reference point. You'd say, oh, you're sitting there quiet. Yeah, all of a sudden there's a reference point. Or you might say, this is color on the wall, and that becomes a reference point. So a reference point is what the attention settles on, but the attention will always settle on something within the field, which means the field has to be present for the attention to settle on something. And if the field's present, bang, there you are. For the field to be present, you are present with the field. So when you're partializing yourself into these little, you know, micro focuses, it's a game you play with yourself. It's specializing.
Are these micro focuses same as those notices that you spoke of, like the noticing, the appreciating, and the acknowledging?
It can be. It's arbitrary. It's just one of the modes of the way consciousness navigates within itself. Consciousness tends to generate various degrees of focus spontaneously all the time. and with sometimes very precisely and narrowly, and sometimes more vaguely. But but then it's a relatively specialized condition for consciousness to be with a full field without any focus. It's not a natural condition. The natural condition is consciousness will tend to drift and focus and notice this and notice this and notice this. And if you just relax and look at, just relax and sit for 5 minutes sometime looking out the window or whatever, just not trying to do anything. You'll note and just look at your experience. You'll notice this, that if you're sensitive to it, you'll notice the consciousness just dances around. You see that, and you see that, and you think of this, and you notice that, and this reminds you of something. So the consciousness is dancing around within different experiential sense fields, within thoughts, within memory, within vague feelings, emotions, whatever. And it's sort of looking here, looking here, just moving around. It does this automatically. It's just nature to do so. It's not, consciousness is inherently unstable. It inherently is dancing with itself all the time.
So what would you say is the difference between these focus points that comes to rest versus noticing?
Noticing is paying attention to the way anything happened. So if you pay attention to the way focus points come to rest, that's noticing. But the focus points themselves is just an event. Noticing is noticing the nature of any event. And it's not done rationally or consciously. It's done by textual presence, by experiential engagement. So right now, we're talking, you're seeing me, you're hearing me, and you can notice the way sound is appearing in your consciousness. That's a noticing, and it has nothing to do with what I'm saying or anything else. It's just noticing the way experience is happening. So noticing, and experience is competent to notice itself. What experience is made of, see, what's being experienced and what's experiencing it are one and the same thing. So they have the same competence, they have the same intelligence, they work by the same principles. So what's perceiving your experience is competent to understand the way it's being perceived. But it's very irrational and nonlinear, so the conscious mind can't follow that. So noticing is letting yourself feel the way something happens illogically, just feel it happening, and experiencing the inherent structure of that, the inherent intelligence of that, which is irrational, but not unintelligent. It is an actuality that happens a certain way, that's undescribable and not linear, but nonetheless it is that, and it's capable of perceiving that. See, and so noticing is that kind of consciousness gets intelligence out of the way it's experiencing in the course of any experiencing. So it's almost sort of looking at yourself experiencing in a way, but not consciously or deliberately or rationally, just by feeling it.
I'm sorry, I kind of came in with the baggage. So again, is this akin to what is choice was awareness? In that sense, that you're saying observe the dynamic with which these focal points arise, or how you settle in on these. And so to me, this seems to have a nature of like, okay, so you're speaking, there's the visual, there's the auditory, and then the psychological reactions, and plus the smell of chai, the birds. So all of that. So you're saying noticing just noticing all this.
Well, any portion of that at all, either a small portion of it or a broader portion of it, or any aspect of it, notice the way it's happening. You're already noticing what's happening, or you wouldn't be experiencing it. But just sort of, you somehow let yourself notice the way that is. Notice what experiencing is. So you're experiencing talking to me now in many ways, sound and thought and so on. But at the same time as that's happening, I'm talking and you're listening and we're thinking and so on and so forth. But at the same time, all of that is experience, and the consciousness, let's say, can look at how that happens. How is it that you can hear me talk? How is it that you can think? And it's, again, it's not rational. It's not like you can ask, it's not a question you ask that has an answer. You know, when you studied Ramana, you know, and it's the same thing. People misunderstand his teaching all the time. You know, he says, ask yourself, who am I? He doesn't mean sit there and say, who am I? Who am I? He means you feel who you are, and you have the capability of feeling who you are, but not with the conscious mind, not with words.
So, the other question I also have was, I find it helpful to kind of imagine myself being headless, like in this room, let the room take predominance over mental activity.
Yeah.
Because the normal experience is like, I'm right behind my eyeballs trying to manipulate.
Sure.
And so, but then even if I'm kind of out in an open field, like all of that spaciousness seems to be confined to that virtual experience.
Sure, it is.
So how is this blinking thing about the stars and the universe, everything, the totality of it? I don't sense that though.
Well, you said it. It's all within your experience. That is a totality. It's not a totality out there. When you see the sun within your experience, and that's the only sun that exists. You can't possibly find a sun outside your experience. How would you find it? So the sun exists within your experience. All the galaxies exist within your experience. I exist within your experience, and your experience alone exists, and nothing exists outside of it. This is just empirical. Just look and see. It's it's completely obvious.
But at any point, I am only experiencing one sun. I'm not experiencing all the other suns that are out there.
Doesn't matter. There is nothing outside your experience. Any sun you're not experiencing doesn't exist. Right now, New York doesn't exist. It's just a thought in your mind because I said it.
Yeah.
So the astronomer who has a big telescope, those galaxies, they exist for him because he can see them?
They exist, the telescope exists for him when he can see the telescope. The telescope exists for him when he can see the telescope. The galaxies exist for him when he's looking at them. And he can think they exist out there because he can think, if I look again, I'll probably find it again. But he might not. It might have disappeared.
Isn't it like you just said, New York doesn't exist, and it was like when you said green elephants, like I totally pictured, oh, I'm in New York, you know? And it's just that, it's not that it doesn't exist, it's that, like you say, it's not what you think it is. It's appearing in my experience, but it's just not, it's not what I think it is. It's just how it's showing up.
It is no more than the way that it is appearing within your experience. Okay, let's take an example. Suppose there's a city somewhere that you've never heard the name of, and you never are going to hear the name of. You've never met anyone from there. You're never going to hear any reference to that city at all. You're going to die in that city. You just never know that it was ever there. How much does that city exist?
It seems like it's as real as the conversation.
Well, it's a real idea.
It's an idea.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was kind of getting at, is that's also got a texture that's as kind of as real as anything else.
Well, ideas are real, but they're real ideas.
Yeah.
So don't mix your metaphors.
That's what I was, I think that's a better way of saying what I was thinking.
So is Washington real? Washington is real because I'm seeing this portion of it, and the portion of it is real as the portion of it that I'm seeing. There may be other portions of it I'm thinking of or imagining or whatever, and so they're real as that in that bandwidth, as nothing else. When I die, let's say I die and have complete forgetfulness that this incarnation ever happened, it's just gone. It's like when you go to sleep, your body disappears, your life disappears, the events of the day are gone back. You're just like blah, 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 right? When I die, this may as well have never happened. It doesn't exist. Suppose you had a previous life. Where is it? How real is it? Except as a concept in your mind now because we're talking about it. It's nothing. It's hypothetical. And everything is equally hypothetical unless you're experiencing it now. And what it is no more than what you're experiencing now. Right now, Washington looks like a couple of greenhouses and a few trees. That's what Washington is, right? Now, when I'm in a plane this afternoon taking off, if I look out the window, Washington might look like a lot more than that, descriptively. But that would be Washington then. And when I'm not here, Washington doesn't exist unless I happen to think about it. In which case it exists as a thought. But there is no Washington. There's a thought I can call Washington, and there's a light, the patterns of light I could call Washington. But that's the only Washington you can find. In other words, it's a reality check. What exists? What is real? Your experience. Right. Can you know anything else is real? How can you know? How can you know?
Yeah,
you're just brainwashed. If you believe something else is real, you've been sold a bill of goods. Because how do you know? Santa Claus. Visit the North Pole. Yeah, right. Memory. Yeah, right. Benevolent politicians. Talk about fantasy.
I guess what I was sort of tripping on was that it still has a texture, like when you say New York, in my experience, there's an experience and there's a texture to that experience. Sure. It just isn't New York. It isn't the reality.
It's New York. It's New York. There is no New York.
Yeah.
New York is whatever you make it. And you're making that texture and that memory and that gestalt of memories and fantasies and whatever thoughts, whatever exists for you, you're designating that as New York. So New York is a name, an abstract name for the concrete actuality of those experiential vibes or whatever you experience.
Yeah.
And that's all New York ever is. New York is a name. What is New York? Suppose you're on your hands and knees, in the Bowery studying, a little bit of gum is stuck to the sidewalk in New York. That's what New York is. If that's what it is for you.
Yeah.
Suppose you're flying over New York, looking down your village. That's what New York is. And the notion that there is an actual New York out there that is a certain way. New York is an infinite potential of interfaces, all of which look completely different. They're all New York, and none of them is New York. They're just what they are. The gum on the sidewalk in the Bowery is New York. The skyline is New York. If it happens to be at that moment. If it's not at that moment, then it's just a concept, unless you're imagining it, and then that imagination that you're calling New York is New York. Picture the New York skyline. I'm experiencing New York. But that's just a claim.
And it seems like there's also like a transition from, bringing it away from New York, since, genuinely, we're not in New York, but
we are in Washington. We are in Washington, yeah.
I know, that's changed, New York State of mind, but but there's a transition from that textural recognition to, and it's real fast, to language, to naming. And that has a texture too, that movement from, I just got that when you were talking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
there's all these modes. Quick. There's all these modes and they coexist and they don't get each other's way. And the delusion is that they're all blend together as one thing. When you look carefully, you notice there are independent flashes. There's a pattern in the imagination, there's a verbal thing, there's a thought, these are all sort of separate energy events in different bandwidths of your experience, and they aren't a unified whole. So the New York we're talking about has been cobbled together out of all these different flashes in different dimensions, and they, in no way are they one thing. But they're sort of experientially smeared together as a gestalt, and no, that's New York. And we do this all the time. a part of the advantage of the exercise, or the kind of exercise we were playing with this morning, is it shows you the way experience is actually composite. You know, when we aren't critical of experience, it's just sort of smeared together. Our ideas and our interpretation and our sense experience and all just sort of collapses into, well, I'm just sitting here experiencing being in this room. But that's bullshit. It's not true. It's taking a bunch of very separate elements and claiming through not being sensitive of what they actually are, that it's all one thing. And it's one thing, but it's aspects of qualities that are occurring within the experiential field, and infinitely many other qualities are occurring simultaneously that have nothing to do with that.
Is that, I was trying to feel my way that what was the difference between texture and recognition? And
there's no difference.
Yeah, it didn't seem like there was anything there.
But the textural recognition is the recognition of your inherent intelligence, what your true intelligence, rather than your rational intelligence, which is analysis and thinking about it and talking about it. Which is slippery, because that's an aspect of your inherent intelligence too. So, you know, why don't we take a 5-minute break, because the stuff goes on and on, it goes in circles. We'll be having lunch in a little bit.
Just have a technical question about Churchill. So the first two, so the sort of 4 qualities that they like to talk about is the first stage is absence and openness, and the second one is unity, spontaneity.
It's a simpler way to look at these things. Don't approach them in terms of qualities like that. Churchill is feeling the unresolvability of things. Feeling everything is present, but nothing is actually any particular way. And it's a feeling that's like sort of openness or spaciness or edgelessness or whatever. And it's a textural feeling. Togel, on the contrary, is attending to the dynamism of experience. After the break, we'll do a Togel experiment, and I'll show you just what it is.
Cool. Okay.
It's not unrelated. They're both actually kind of the same thing, but the emphasis is very different. You could say the Churchill, the emphasis is sort of spacing out while still being present. And in Togel, you're zooming in to very precisely to the dynamism, the flickering nature, the dancing nature of actual experiential energy. You're being a part of it, you're looking at what is an experiential presence actually made of, what's its substance. Whereas in Churchill, you're just feeling what's its nature. In its nature, you feel a dreamlike openness, almost ghostliness. And when you look at what it's made of, you've discovered this intense vibratory, twinkling, whatever.
The first one, I want to pretty much in.
Yeah.
The second one.
That's standard. Typically, as the way Zoltan usually presented, Churchill is the basis for it of getting to the nature, the essence of emptiness. And then Togel is a precise refinement of that. It's empty, but it's not nothing. So you're being with the somethingness of it. And it's very paradoxical, because of course that somethingness is actually empty. But so you can get the emptiness first, then you can do the somethingness without getting seduced into the actually is something.
Temperature feels good.
Yeah,
I think it really helps.
yeah, as I said, it's my, you know, if you turn the fan on, though, it's gonna wash over the sound. It sure does go away. Yeah, yeah, no. Are you waiting outside?
Yeah, but you were here before.
No, actually, I'm just rotating around.
Yes, somebody put it in your life. Yeah. There's a daydream. Right. Oh, yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah, I do. But it's just their concept experience. Yeah. It was a long flight. Oh, we flew. Actually, yeah. No, we flew. Yeah.
Oh, you're off? No. Sorry, not off, sorry. Well, it's been lovely seeing you, and thank you so, so much again for your hospitality. And I hope to see you before too very long. Oh, cool, wonderful. Drag Peter down. Drag Peter down.
Massive spring, I have another pair of them, you walk around the trails with the musician, which will go out. So these have the cover, but the other ones are actually more free. Inside the, so you walk, you pressing, and then you. Plus, it just feels very dense, and you're all, you're not.
Yeah.
Hey, I'll ask around when I get to the Bay Area.
If I were you, Peter Brown.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't associated you yet with that experience, seeing you on the internet.
Have you seen that before?
Yeah, because Peter told me that you.
But you are.
Yeah, the experience you.
But you didn't connect that with that.
Yeah, right. It's like there's three different things. Because yeah, right, I remember you telling me the intersection that I didn't connect the heart.
So we did the 72, he was a 69.
Right.
He was the one who was all messed up, because he was a figure of action. He was telling us, I made the bags for the first trip, which one is that? And I laughed, I wasn't there, I was gonna go on the 69. I backed out, I was like, I wasn't going, so we had a little bit of change in the line, and told me to do something. So, you know, when I left, in the 69, 70, when he came back in, as a monk in 72, and went on the 70, he did a 72. But a lot of the same things on the beach and the island. And only for me, there was things that I told you, like, I was I remember one thing that had from girl, and I got some wire and nails and sweat.
Yeah, right. Yeah. There's, it's how there is. It's just like it was saying, it's supposed to be a way to monitor.
Thank you for that.
It's so hard to explain.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I know that other people are asking questions or whatever, I think yeah. Yeah,
This is most of us. Almost.
They didn't come back to us.
Oh, okay, cool. So this is all of us. So, would you like to do another exercise?
Experiment.
Play with experiment. So, see this area right here? Or correspondingly, this area right here. Here's what you do. Just pick one of those and just relax. Gaze steadily at it. Don't let your eyes wander. Just sort of keep your eyes in the center of the area. But very relaxed. Don't force it or be constrained or try to tighten it up or see it. Just sort of relax and gently gaze in the center of one of those areas. And just be with what's present in your visual field. Watch the way what is present is the way it is. And if you're thinking about things or hearing things, don't worry about that. Just attend, for this exercise, this is just about the visual field. Just notice what's there and the way it's there. Don't worry about what it is. Don't worry about it's a wall or it's not a wall or it's white or anything. Just be with the presence of the light and be with, just see what happens. Just relax. Just relax and you sort of let yourself feel it. And occasionally you'll drift off or your eyes will drift away. Just gently pull them back and just sort of, without letting your eyes dance around too much, just sort of gently and relaxedly gaze at that one point right in the center and just see what's happening in that one square. And just watch what happens. Just very loose and easy, just relaxing and looking at that. And just notice what you're seeing. No, there's no LSD in the chai.
I hadn't quite thinking of it.
So how was that for anybody? What was that like? What'd you say? What'd you say? Yeah, isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing? You just look, all you're doing is looking at a blank wall. Nothing's happening there. But all of a sudden it's dancing and it's moving and things are shooting across. And geometrics, mandalas are coming and going. Isn't that amazing?
Peter, I found myself thinking, oh, it's floaters.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to be 60 here pretty soon, and oh, it's floaters, okay. That kind of thing. But then what's even weirder, not only were there all the shapes and everything, but that blank of wall, first it became just this amorphous sort of blur of white. And then after that, it became utterly, completely meaningless. I mean, yeah, like there was nothing there.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Don't worry about it. Doesn't have to make sense. So the point of all this, the point of this simple exercise like that, is to let ourselves notice the way experience actually presents.
That seemed meaningful to me.
Huh?
That seemed very meaningful to me.
Well, it is meaningful.
Okay.
Don't worry about his meaningfulness. His meaninglessness is your meaningfulness. So don't worry about it. It's all good.
Right.
But the point of this is, ordinarily, the way the mind works, the way consciousness or perception, psychology or perception work, is, the mind thinks it knows what it's looking at. Like I'm sitting here, I'm looking at a group of people sitting in chairs, and my eyes sort of dances around, and I notice this, and I notice that, and I notice, looking at different colors and different shapes. And because of that motion, it actually seems to be very static and stable. But if you do the opposite experiment, which is very unnatural, because ordinarily the eyes are dancing around. We don't notice it particularly. Even if you're looking at someone's face, you're actually, looking around at this portion and that portion, this eye and that eye. It's unconsciously done. But if you let the eyes gaze steadily, especially at a blank surface or the sky or something without features, so there's nothing for the mind to seize on as, differentiating objects or qualities, you begin to notice the actual dynamism of the energy that is present as experience. But it's dancing, it's sparkling, it's moving, it's always breathing. Every tradition has different words for this. In India, it's called Shakti. It's called Chi. In China, various, Kundalini. The different traditions have all these names for the energy that experience is made out of. And but the point is, the names and all and the theory is completely irrelevant, of course. The point is that this is experienceable. And when you do these kinds of experiments, you can notice new aspects of the way you're actually experiencing that you didn't let yourself notice before because you were caught up in your usual way of doing things, which tends to be very censorious and very goal-oriented. Ordinarily, when you're looking at something, you're very goal-oriented. You're trying to parse it together and pull it together into being what it is that you're doing. But when you're just with experience more vaguely and more openly like that, where there's no agenda and no particular objects, then the dynamism and the amorphousness of the actual experiential energy becomes more obvious. And this is very easy to do. It's very repeatable. You can play with it sometime on your own. You can learn a lot about what you're actually experiencing. Because then you'll begin to notice that even when you're in your normal mode and you're dancing around, keeping things very coherent, the energy that's present is actually dancing and jiggling and sizzling and tingling. And so you begin to notice this, and you notice the dynamism and the inherent incoherence of experiential qualities. This is an exercise. This is an aspect, a very small aspect of a whole school of practice within Dzogchen, which you may have heard of, called Toka, which is a way of noticing what experiential energy actually is directly, experientially.
So this Krishnamurti kind of would suggest in some places as keeping the eyeball steady. And when I kind of stumbled onto it first time, it seemed like I was seeing things in 3D for the first time.
Yes.
As opposed to like a two-dimensional world that seemed so natural before that. But I don't see any of the sparkling or.
Don't worry about it. You can play with it sometime and see. And it's not important that it looks like anything. The main thing is to discover the ways in which it's other than we're used to noticing. The ways in which it's subtly different.
Yeah.
And the more you pursue experiments like this, the more they will develop, and the more they will notice. The more they will be available to notice.
Because then when I was discussing that with my wife, she said, "But I always see it in 3D. What are you talking about?"
Well, of course, she's a woman. We poor males, of course, are the handicapped gender.
What's the benefit in noticing things to be different than the way that you have previously perceived them? Subtler and subtler experiences are having things be maybe more dynamic and sparkly, and all the different ways that they appear to be different. Is that still just the content? The content is still, that's just changing content in experiencing.
Sure, but it's a development of your own of your experience of the range of the ways experience can be. which potentially broadens your perspective of what's going on here and what you are. There's no actual benefit per se, you know. Let me see, how can I put this? One mode of perception is not better or worse than another mode of perception, but the dilemma in spirituality is not seeing the way experience actually is, because we have a censored version that we think it is. And so any effective spiritual training is noticing what's the way experience actually is, not because the ways that you're not seeing it are better, but because you're not used to letting yourself see them because of the censorship that the interpretive framework ordinarily imposes on experience. So let's say a normal consensus reality worldview might be, oh, I'm me and I'm in my body and I'm this little consciousness. It's a byproduct of some brain chemistry, and it's all matter, it's all me, it's all, you know, and the world is all out there and it's big and it's vast and it just exists subjectively and so on and so forth. So you have this whole construct, you know, or whatever construct you may have. And, you know, the nature of human psychology, it tends to generate these constructs, these interpretive frameworks of whatever, or the interpretive framework might be, you know, we're all being controlled by aliens from Sirius. I mean, that's an interpretive framework too, but it's just, but again, it's sort of, in effect, it amounts to censorship, because it allows you to perceive anything that is within that narrative, but anything that's too far outside that, you won't even notice it, because it sort of is irrelevant, so it sort of gets downplayed as just noise in the system. And the point of spiritual practice is to notice the way that the ways that the actuality of experience transcends or is beyond what we're used to thinking of it as being, which spontaneously enhances our sense of what this is, our sense of what we are, our sense of what the world is, our sense of what life is. And if you do a good enough job, then your sense of what this is corresponds to what it actually is, which turns out to be a very cool thing, because what it actually is unsurpassingly wonderful. And most people's idea of what it is pretty pathetic and shabby by comparison. And especially their self-image, you know. In Western culture particularly, I think people are very naturally, what's the word, self-loathing or something. and there's no need for it. Whatever you are, whatever you like, you're wonderful. You know, and when you get the context of this, that becomes more and more obvious. Yeah.
If you could please speak to, as we notice, if I'm correct in understanding, it draws us in. It begins to play with us. We agree with that. So in what role is our whole sexuality, this whole playfulness of playing with ourselves, playing with each other, which I can think it's her or him or it or whatever I like, but it's playing, it's playfulness. So my question, I guess, is pleasure obviously has a wonderful role in this, because pleasure is the scent, the pulling in that sucks us in. And so is there I guess it's not danger sounds so stupid, but getting lost in the pleasure. Of course, we're so warned about that in our Western world. So.
There's no, on the contrary. As you say, pleasure is the juice that sucks us in, and experience is inherently pleasurable. Experience is actually pure pleasure. And being with experience as pure pleasure is the simplest and most enjoyable way to move towards spiritual fruition. The only danger is getting caught up in partial bandwidths unnecessarily. Like, for example, if you identify with, you know, specific explicit human sexuality as being what pleasure is, which it certainly is, then you're limiting yourself by not letting yourself perhaps notice the way that perception of color or perception of sound is equally pleasurable. So nothing is out of bounds, and pleasure is the principle of engagement. I mean, this is why feeling the texture of experience, one immediately stumbles onto hedonism, one stumbles onto pleasure. I mean, the textures of experience are so exquisite. I mean, you know, color, sound, I mean, you know, it's just like these constant energetic caresses of the consciousness, is, you know, or, you know, music, anything, you know, and touch, and all forms of subtler energy dance, you know, the stimulation of intelligent communication, or I mean, you know, or inspired intuition, anything, you know, all of these different modes are exquisitely pleasurable. The presence of experiential energy is pleasure. Energy is pleasure. You know, you've heard, I expect many of you will have heard the saying that the ultimate nature of reality is Satchidananda in India. Sat is translated as being, Chit is consciousness, and Ananda is bliss. But the bliss, if you take the bliss wrong, you get very confused. The bliss is the bliss of the pleasure of experiential energy. The energy of experience is pure pleasure, it's pure joy. It is that, its very nature is that, and the act of perceiving it is that too. And so letting yourself settle into that just becomes more and more obvious, more and more explicit, and then you're just continually in a state of absolute, literal, you know, ecstasy as all experiential qualities are you know, flowing within your experience. And that's the totality of reality. That's what this is. Being is what I call presence. The presence, the actuality of this. This is, you know, this is not a concept. This is really here. This is. I mean, I call it radiant presence. So presence, it says Chit, consciousness. It is intelligence. It is being perceived. It is meaningful. And Ananda, it is pure pleasure. It is pure enjoyment in a most immediate sensory sense, but not limited to a coarse sensoriness. You know, all energy presence is just pure pleasure, pure delight.
So when I'm at the dentist and they kind of doing deep learning, without an anesthetic or partial, and the pain is there, I mean, I just tell myself, like, who is it happening to? And then suddenly that pain kind of becomes a certain kind of joy in the sense, like, number 5 is alive.
Sure. Or another thing that happens is we partialize it. You know, the conscious mind has likes and dislikes. Some senses we like, some senses we don't like. But the unconscious mind likes everything. The unconscious mind is the pleasure principle, is always what really drinks in the pleasure. Have you ever noticed you're walking down the street and you smell an unpleasant smell? And what do? You take another whiff, right?
I'm not going to admit to it.
Because your unconscious likes it. It's like, ooh, that's really pungent. Whoa, yeah, it sure is. So, and it's like that. And pain's the same way. You get a little pain in your tooth and it hurts. And what do? You poke it again. Oh, it still hurts. Oh, it hurts again. Oh, still hurting. Damn this. Right? Yeah. Because the conscious mind is playing a game of not liking it. But the unconscious mind loves the energy of experience, because to it, it's just a light show. It's like, whoa, this is great. No, check it out. Because we have these different modes in our, you know, we get very partialized because we're, you know, in normal human society, we're used to identifying with the conscious mind. But, you know, we're more than the conscious mind. And so when you become aware of that, then these things become obvious. And again, experiencing the pleasure, the bliss, the amazing ecstasy of the energy of experience itself is a key way to tune into this fullness of consciousness, because that's its mode, that's what it's doing all the time. You already are that, it's already doing it, so it's really just letting yourself notice that, let yourself stumble onto that.
Yesterday after the talk, I went to the experimental EMP, and I was sitting outside to watch the kids play. There's kids play, hundreds of kids, and just see the drama or each kid's personality and the play between the parents and the kids. It really sucks me in because it's so juicy.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, the story disappeared. It became full screen. Everything in it, and it's just one thing. It's just all those movement, and all the stories is gone. So, and then I stayed there for a while. It was just the whole space was. And then my attention drifted to another kid's drama. It's like go in and out.
Yeah.
So is that kind of a notice, one kind of noticing, see how the conscious is moving from focusing
Yes.
and to unfocusing.
Sure. Yeah, but there's all these modes. There's all these modes of the way the consciousness is with the experiential field. You know, focus and unfocus, and being with, you know, tuning into intensity and drama, or just extremity of experience, and then ducking back into sort of a more sort of a peaceful, equilibrated kind of a feel. All these different modes, and it's constantly dancing with itself this way. I mean, you know, talk about another example of the way consciousness likes the pleasure of intensity is, look at the way people love horror. And people love movies. They love to be scared. They like movies where people are shooting each other. You know, all these the pathetic nature of our popular culture, and people are eating it up. They love it, right? Not because it's good quality, but because it's juicy. It's got a kick, you know. And that's, you know, the unconscious, the inherent intelligence is not biased. If it's energy, it's good. If it is, it's good. From the unconsciousness point of view, if we're going to blow up the planet, yeah, bring it on. That's going to be a hell of an explosion to see. You know, war's great. You know.
So what's happening here? Maybe I'm like so in my conscious mind, because everything that you've been describing so far, there hasn't been a resonance in terms of horror. You know, I don't let the little kid in me watch violence. You know, I don't like bad smells. Sure. I don't go back for a second.
No, it's not a matter of not liking them. It's not a matter of not liking these things.
No, I'm talking about the conscious mind.
Yeah, I understand. The conscious mind doesn't. The conscious mind plays a game. The conscious mind plays a game of judgment. The conscious mind has a very elaborate, you know, sort of a scorekeeping of good and bad, like and dislike.
Yeah.
You know, being green is good. Recycling is good. Using less gas is good. Smaller carbon footprint, that's great. You know, all the other stuff is bad. The unconscious mind doesn't give a shit.
So am I just not?
It's like, I want a fast, loud car. A big, fast, loud car, you know?
So Peter, am I just hopelessly not in touch with my unconscious mind?
I don't know. That's your problem.
I'm here, okay?
You're the therapist.
But what I'm saying to you, not being so silly, is that I'm aware of the judgment that I don't like the horror, I don't like this. So I guess what seems to be a logical question is, am I simply so disconnected from the unconscious?
It's possible. I don't know. That's something to play with and explore. You know, and you can, a way to explore that might be to find shades of gray and see if you can be with what's there. So something that you don't really hate and you don't really love, but you kind of have a very slight bias towards one way or the other, and just sort of be with what's there and try and see it outside the boundaries of that value system. something that you feel strong about one way or the other, you're gonna have a knee-jerk, it's gonna be snapped into that.
So can
that
I
orientation.
share with you something that I have been playing with is, next door, there are these little small yappy barking dogs that for summers now I've absolutely hated. And
That's what they make rat poison.
I thought of that, but then I would be worried about my karma. And so, I haven't brought myself to that.
But see, you thought of it.
I did.
You did?
But my,
Sounds like horror.
but my point is, some part decided this summer I'm just not going to mind it. I'm not going to object. And the astonishing thing is that in the beginning of the summer, I would just notice, well, maybe I'm just going to write them a letter, not to be quiet or whatever. But it's starting to just fade. I hear the dogs. There's not the story or whatever. And there's kind of like a relaxation, which kind of amazed me. But is that what I'm not sure if I'm kind of.
Well, that's a little different. That's more like what I was talking about by using basically hypnotic means to navigate your experience. You use suggestion. So you can use suggestion very specifically to change something you like to something you don't like and vice versa. It can seem to be a gentle progressive conditioning where you're letting yourself relax about something or whatever. But basically that's all just suggestion. And suggestion is powerful, it works. I mean, basically the things you like are largely, and you don't like are largely a result of suggestion too. Already, I mean, we don't necessarily realize that because the suggestion already happened.
Maybe a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, we're all creatures of intense brainwashing. And our sense of ourself and all of that has been ossified by these essentially hypnotic techniques into, now it's just second nature, it's just a given. But the point is that those same techniques are always viable anytime, and it's possible to use these techniques to navigate your experience, but also to manipulate, your conscious orientation to things.
Doing these experiments, it feels like there's two different textures I find. One is the letting experience reveal itself, and there's almost a lightness or sweetness to it.
Yes.
Second texture is me.
Right.
This almost mopey character that says, well, that's not the sweetness that I'm looking for.
Right. Yeah.
And both are going on at the same time.
Well, don't worry about the second one. Don't try and fight it, or just don't worry about it. That's going to come up and it'll do it. That's okay. That's no problem. But go to the other and just go back to it again from time to time. And just by familiarity of being with that, it will transform the other without addressing it directly. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about this yoga is you solve your problems without solving your problems. You solve your problems by bypassing them. So you go to wherever you're doing noticing, wherever you're getting that little lightness or that zap or that whatever, little vitality, little wow factor, whatever it looks like. And just go to that from time to time. And you'll find that just doing that alone will ultimately transform your entire orientation to your experience, which will include your sense of yourself, will include all the whole schmear.
Do you have anything to say about, transcending and whatnot, as opposed to, shadow side kind of thing and whatnot, like, ignoring these persistent problems in your life? And
I would say don't worry about it. Trying to transcend something like an aspiration or trying to have a stance, you're actually reifying it by saying you're making it more important by saying it's important enough to do something about it. So you're throwing gasoline on the fire.
What about, these patterns that people have where everyone else is saying they've got a problem with this, they're a jerk, or they're,
that's everyone else's problem.
So you can just keep bypassing and transcending, and that's their problem? Yeah, sure. Okay.
But generally speaking, anything that's an issue in your life, don't worry about it. And bypass it entirely Find somewhere in your experience, in your experiential field where you can do noticing. And that will ultimately fix your problem for you without addressing it directly. Addressing problems psychologically is very, very slippery, because as soon as you address the problem, you're actually feeding it. Because by addressing it or trying to solve it, you're focusing attention on it. And there's one cardinal principle in experience: attention makes things more real. Attention makes them more solid. Attention makes them bigger. Attention makes them more powerful. And lack of attention, on the contrary, makes them more ghostly, makes them recede, makes them less relevant, makes them unimportant. Which is why you give your attention to noticing, and just don't worry. Don't try to withdraw your attention from anything else, from problems or whatever, because withdrawing attention is the way of giving them attention. Because you have to define it as being there to withdraw your attention from it, which is an ass-backwards way of giving it attention. So you're actually feeding it. So trying to solve a problem is making the problem bigger. Whereas if you ignore it entirely and go over here, it will naturally tend to recede, especially if what you're finding over here is vital. Because your consciousness is basically like a kid in the candy store. Show it something bright and sparkly, and it's like, you look like you're probably too young to have kids, but when you have kids, when your kid's throwing a tantrum, savvy parents know they got something saying, and you're like, what's that? And they forget all about the tantrum because you sucked them into your, something bright and sparkly, distraction. And your consciousness is exactly the same. Think of your consciousness as a 2-year-old. It's looking for bright and sparkly and fun. Right. So you give it bright and sparkly and fun, and that's where it's going, because that's what it wants. And these problems just get left behind, and eventually they wither. They don't necessarily get solved in their own terms, but they recede in relevancy, which makes them, of course, paradoxically easier to solve.
I mean, just the classic example is all of these spiritual teachers who, are maybe molesting some of their students in the background, and stuff like that. It seems like they're so deeply realized in so many ways and whatnot, but these things just don't go away. That you're just saying.
But they don't need to go away.
Yeah.
Spirituality and behavior have nothing to do with each other. You can be fully realized and be a serial killer child molester.
Now you lost me. Maybe it's my background, my education.
It's because I have good lawyers.
He has good lawyers.
Help me out with that.
There's nothing to say. Spirituality is about spirituality. Behavior is about behavior. They have nothing to do with each other.
Well, let's
say you can be a good fit. Let's say you can be a good physicist and be a jerk of a spouse. Okay. Because physics and relationship have nothing to do with each other. Spirituality is like physics. It's science. It has nothing to do with what you do or how well you do it. So spirituality is about seeing what is the way it is.
Seeing what is the way it is.
And what you do within that context has nothing to do with that seeing necessarily. So you see some spiritual teacher, you say, oh, he's sleeping with all of his female students, he can't be realized. No, you're completely misunderstanding. He may or may not be realized, but it has absolutely nothing to do with screwing his students.
Well, if I'm seeing things how they really are, how would and I'm this realized person, not, and I have these people around me. Maybe I just have a lot of pictures and fantasies, but I would think that part of realization is that the ego kind of sits down. It's not so present because I'm seeing through these things.
It may or may not be, but it is what it is. It's a misunderstanding of what spirituality is.
Why do you want to use the word spirituality? Because that itself is kind of hocus pocus.
Sure, it's a word.
But let's just say realization.
Realization is a good word.
Seeing what actually is.
Right. It has nothing to do with the state of your personality. You can have a very dysfunctional personality and still see what it is.
But wouldn't that be dropping off as realization occurs? No?
Not necessarily. It may diminish in relevance. It may be through lack of investment, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to A realized person doesn't necessarily become plain vanilla. The personality is natural.
No, I understand that, but the dropping away of the things that are, no longer useful.
Maybe they're dropping away, but he's still, he still has a little bit of juice left and he's using it up, sleeping with a few students. Maybe that's what the dropping away happens to look like.
It's crazy wisdom.
Yeah, okay.
But it's just apples and oranges.
Yeah.
The one has nothing to do with the other. The nature of the personality has nothing to do with realization or not. You can be a dysfunctional personality. You can be a personality who's been severely abused and damaged and still be realized or not. Or you can be a very sane, balanced personality and be realized or not. And they have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. That's almost even
it's
harder than what we're talking about.
It's more complex than it may seem, because there is an interrelationship, but it's not a simple one-to-one linear thing. It's not like realization is a magic wand that fixes your personality. Realization frees you of giving a shit about your personality. Liberation looks a whole lot like not giving a shit, which in the case of a warped personality can be licensed for all kinds of...
Yeah, nihilism.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it might look like nihilism from a certain point of view, but a realized person, there's no such thing as nihilism because everything's God. There's no nothing, there's everything. Everything is God and you're it. And that is realizable whether you're a healthy persona or not, whether you're a scarred, psyche or not.
Well, it's really interesting because, and these words are going to just get all mumble jumble, but so this person named Nancy has had an investment in having things fall away.
Sure. But that's very common. That's very common. There's all this spiritual mythology that, transcend the ego, let your personality fall away, move into the light. I mean, God knows what. And it's all a crock. It's more,
certain
it's a
things
bill
have
of goods.
happened. I mean,
Well, of course, certain
fallings
things
have happened.
Sure.
Oh, okay, cool.
Sure, fallings happen, sure. Things come and go.
Well, isn't that the functioning, and that's fine too, right? I mean, if your unfoldment is that you care about things falling away.
Sure. And you can be realized, it doesn't mean you're definitely necessarily going to be a sex offender.
Well, I don't think I was going to worry
I'm really
about
glad to hear that. It's a big bonus.
No, thank God. I don't have to retain that staff of lawyers on standby.
I just want to be an asshole. I don't want to hurt anybody.
Not to worry. For most of us, that persists. Anyway, on that note, why don't we?
In schools of Buddhism or in Ramana Maharshi, who kind of say stuff like, there is a lot of work even after realization to be done.
Sure.
In terms of addressing issues like what Nancy brought up.
Yes, because realization is not the end of life.
Really?
And the process of life is ongoing. And its process is what it is. And so that's that.
And then Rana kind of just say, person is not fully realized, and as far as there's even the slightest trace of us ego running through. And so, but what I'm hearing from you is that once a person is realized, it gives him the freedom with whatever neurosis that he has, and that allows him to do whatever.
Put it this way, when you're not realized, you're very narcissistic and self-important, and you think your state of your mind really, really matters. When you realize all of that releases, and you discover the state of your mind is not particularly important, which can look like license to behave certain ways, but it also can look like, well, it's much easier to straighten it out then, because I'm not so caught up in it. I'm what's going on with me really matters, and I'm the soap opera of my life, becomes a joke. You look at it and go, sure, I'm a neurotic wreck because I was raised by crappy parents in a crappy society. Welcome to the club. But in realization, the context of that importance of that just recedes into its proper place, which is just a factor that's here. It's
Well,
like,
wouldn't that be recognized, if one is becoming realized, wouldn't that be recognized as a story? And then that story kind of starts to fade.
exactly. The story vanishes, but the energy doesn't.
The energy doesn't.
Sure.
And the story may not play it so loud.
Well, no, wait a minute. Whoa. So if the story recedes, I would think the energy goes right along with it.
It's a matter of terminology. The structure of a personality is not a story. It's not a concept. It's not a narration. It's think of it as an energy input. Your temperament is not a story.
Okay,
Your temperament is a quality that you embody.
Right.
That you embody through long habit, you embody it by your genetic nature, but you also embody it by conditioning, and so on and so forth. And so that all of that has a lot of staying power, you call it, momentum, ongoing, as a structural, the SUV across the street is not suddenly going to turn into a Ferrari. It's an SUV. It's going to be an SUV.
Let's stay with the...
So suppose I've ended up being an SUV. Or let's suppose I've ended up being a neurotic jerk.
Let's say, we had effed up childhoods.
Let's say.
We were
just one of those rare people I've heard of.
Yeah, so we had effed up childhood, and then a story gets created because of the way I interpreted what happened. As I recognize more and more the story, and I see the interpretation, that starts to drop away because I see it.
But yet you see, you're confusing a therapeutic mode from a psychological mode, and they're different.
Yeah,
because but the process of therapy is not just about stories dropping away. The process of therapy is about energetic engagement with your own nature in the context of another person, a therapist. And so there's a lot, even though therapy, for example, deals with stories and that sort of thing, that's not where the center of gravity is what's going on. What's really going on is it's an energy dance. Just like what's going on here is an energy dance. We're doing words and saying concepts, but the majority of what's happening here is not that. The majority of what's happening here is other than that. Just like in any human relationship or in any context at all. Anyway, we're cutting way into the lunch hour, so why don't we feed our faces? It's 12:15. Why don't we shoot to be back here at 1:30-ish or whenever, shortly thereafter, whatever's convenient for you. We can wrap up this weekend. I'm going to need to knock off probably around 3-ish because I've got a plane to catch. And you all will probably be pretty toasty by then anyway. So.
Well, now that we know we have license to act however we want, what
more do we do? You don't need my permission. Who am I? Take it up with the cops. You tell it to the judge.
I don't know if everybody's interested in this question. Yeah, you could say, apply to all
One of the most important aspects in the practice of spirituality is the energy relationship with the Guru. And that is, it's hard to, in practice in spirituality,